The Republican presidential debates, the first tier, were held at the Reagan Library. And of course Nancy Reagan was in attendance, so everybody was all up on the Reagans. So of course we continued the political discourse by talking to some Iraq war with the Republican candidates. The scene really opens up with Giuliani saying that we need to express hope in our efforts. Then John McCain promptly reminds us that if we pull out of Iraq, a whole bunch of terrorists will come to our towns and kill us all genocidally. Tommy Thompson, of course, expressed part of something that we heard from the Democrat debates of making a federalized Iraqi government with states, and I already had my comments about those.
Mayor Giuliani, how do we get back to Ronald Reagan's Morning in America?
You get back to it with an optimism. The same situation that I faced in New York City. When I became mayor of New York City, 65-70% thought New York City was going on the wrong track. And what I did was I set policies and programs of growth, of moving people toward prosperity, security, safety. And what we can borrow from Ronald Reagan, since we are in his library, is that great sense of optimism that he had. He led by building on the strengths of America, not running America down.
Senator McCain, most of the public pessimism today has to do with Iraq. What would you need as Commander-in-Chief to win the war in Iraq?
I would need the support of the American people. I would need to be able to show them some success in Iraq, both on the battlefield as well as with the Maliki government. We have a new general. We have a new strategy. That strategy can succeed. The young men and women who are serving are the best of America. I believe that if you bring around about stability in the neighborhoods in Iraq and have the Maliki government govern, you are going to succeed. My friends, when the majority leader of the United States Senate says we've lost the war, the men and women that are serving in Iraq reject that notion. And if we lost, then who won? Did Al-Qaeda win? When on the floor of the House of Representatives, they cheer when they pass a withdrawal motion that is a certain date for surrender. What were they cheering? Surrender? Defeat? We must win in Iraq. If we withdraw, there will be chaos, there will be genocide, and they will follow us home.
Governor Thompson, if you're Commander-in-Chief and you want to win this war in Iraq, what do you need to do to win it?
First, you have to support the troops. There's an undying bond in America that any time an American soldier is in harm's way, we have to protect him. Beyond that, there are three things that I've laid out. Number one, I believe the al-Maliki government should be required to vote as to whether or not they want America in their country. If they vote yes, it gives us a legitimacy for being there. If they vote no, we should get out. Secondly, there are 18 territories in Iraq, just like we have 50 states in America. I would require those territories to elect governments just like we do in our states. And if you do so, the Shiites will elect Shiites, Sunnis will elect Sunnis, Kurds will elect Kurds, and you won't have this internecine civil war.
Then Senator Brownback goes on a rant about regime building, forgetting entirely that there are, in fact, no moderate Muslims in the Middle East.
For the next question, recent polls in the Islamic world reveal a sea of hostility toward the United States, feeding what General Petraeus calls the central front of al-Qaeda in Iraq. How do we win this war if every dead terrorist is so easily replaced?
I think we win the war by standing up for our values and working with those who will work with us. I think you have to remember that while we're in a war on terrorism, there are a number of people that are with us, that work with us around the world, and we also in the Islamic world. We're partnering with a number of moderate Muslim regimes, and that's something I think we need to convey into the Muslim world as well.
Of course, we hear the obligatory comments of my favorite Republican dark horse candidate, Ron Paul.
Congressman Paul, you voted against the war. Why are all your fellow Republicans up here wrong?
That's a very good question, and you might ask the question, why are 70% of the American people now wanting us out of there, and why did the Republicans do so poorly last year? So I would suggest that we should look at foreign policy. I'm suggesting very strongly that we should have a foreign policy of non-intervention, the traditional American foreign policy and a Republican foreign policy. Throughout the 20th century, the Republican Party benefited from a non-interventionist foreign policy. Think of how Eisenhower came in to stop the Korean War. Think of how Nixon was elected to stop the mess in Vietnam? How did we win the election in the year 2000? We talked about a humble foreign policy, no nation building, don't police the world. That is a conservative, it's a Republican, it's a pro-American, it follows the Founding Fathers, and besides, it follows the Constitution. I tried very hard to solve this problem before we went to war by saying, declare war if you want to go to war, fight it and win it, but don't get into it for political reasons or to enforce UN resolutions or pretend the Iraqis were a national threat to us.
Lest we be reminded again, if we vote for John McCain, war with Iran.
Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. We all know that. Iran continues their efforts to build nuclear weapons. Iran is now exporting lethal IEDs and jihadists and suicide bombers into Iraq, killing American soldiers. The Iranians encouraged Hezbollah to attack Israel from Lebanon recently. Iran poses one of the greatest threats to the world, the security of the world and in the Middle East. I believe the Iranians we have got to bring greater pressures, diplomatic, economic, political, join with our European allies who still fear greatly the effect of the cutoff of oil into Europe. We have to work together. If the Russians and the Chinese are not helpful to us, then we had better figure out a way to put additional pressures encouraging democracy and freedom within Iraq, which is a very cultured society, within Iran, which is a very cultured society. At the end of the day, we cannot allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons.
Now, of course, watching the debates, I saw Senator Romney make a few comments here and there that were actually all right. For instance, in the following footage, he goes ahead and blatantly condemns the Muslim extremist movement as a whole, saying that, you know, we need to focus on all of the actions of extremist Muslims as they have a cultural agenda that is basically, you know, terrorist 101, you know, cultural genocide and whatnot. But I can't help but think that every time that Mitt Romney speaks, that he is a fuck. I mean, the guy sounds like a fucking dick. I don't really know what it is exactly. Maybe you can watch this footage and you can tell me why he sounds just like a complete fuck. But, okay, go ahead. Tell me.
Governor Romney, respond to the mentioned reference to you by Senator McCain.
Thank you. Of course we get Osama bin Laden and track him wherever he has to go and make sure he pays for the outrage he exacted.
Do we move heaven and earth to do it?
We'll move everything to get him. But I don't want to buy into the Democratic pitch that this is all about one person, Osama bin Laden. Because after we get him, there's going to be another and another. This is about Shia and Sunni. This is about Hezbollah and Hamas and Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. This is a worldwide jihadist effort to try and cause the collapse of all moderate Islamic governments and replace them with a caliphate. They ultimately want to bring down the United States of America. This is a global effort we're going to have to lead to overcome this jihadist effort. It's more than Osama bin Laden, but he is going to pay and he will die.
Then, of course, they do a round table on whether or not natural-born citizens, the natural-born citizen stipulation of presidential requirements should remain in the Constitution, or whether we would change it for people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, who should obviously be running for president. My personal stance on the natural-born citizen thing, not worth changing the Constitution for, even if I thought of a good candidate. Changing the Constitution is a terrible, dangerous idea to ever do basically. And to issue an amendment just to change the natural-born citizen thing, in the false hope that something will not be fucked up, no. Answer, no. Don't change the Constitution ever for any reason. Again, I show you video evidence of Mitt Romney, Governor Mitt Romney. I said Senator earlier. Sorry about that. Governor Mitt Romney being, again, a fuck. In answer to his question of what he dislikes about America, he turns it into a question about everything that he likes about America. And it's, Jesus, can't you just fucking answer a question?
Governor Romney, Daniel Duchovny from Walnut Creek, California wants to know, what do you dislike most about America?
Gosh, I love America. I'm afraid I'm going to be at a loss for words, because America for me is not just our rolling mountains and hills and streams and great cities. It's the American people. And the American people are the greatest people in the world. What makes America the greatest nation in the world is the heart of the American people. Hard-working, innovative, risk-taking, God-loving, family-oriented American people. It's that optimism we thank Ronald Reagan for. Thank you, Mrs. Reagan, for opening up this place in his memory for us. It is that optimism about this great people that makes this the greatest nation on earth.
We skip ahead and recap a few additional questions that were asked of some of the candidates. And then after that, after a brief recap of some of those comments, we skip ahead to making fun of Ron Paul a little more, making him feel like he's not wanted.
Congressman Paul, Pete from Rochester Hills, Michigan, wants to ask you this. If you were president, would you work to phase out the IRS?
Immediately.
That's what they call a softball.
And you can only do that if you change our ideas about what the role of government ought to be. If you think the government has to take care of us from cradle to grave, and if you think our government should police the world and spend hundreds of billions of dollars on a foreign policy that we cannot manage, you can't get rid of the IRS. But if you want to lower taxes, and if you want the government to quit printing the money to come up with the shortfall and cause all the inflation, you have to change policy.
Of course, a perfectly reasonable supposition to get rid of the IRS, because it's not the government's position to do everything in the world for us, yet everybody seems to laugh about it. Now, we continue. There's a roundtable briefly of some abortion views. It seems to be broken up into two camps. One, the pro-life camp that just wants abortion banned everywhere and anyhow. And two, the states' rights camp who believes it's up to the states, and that's actually the position that our Constitution plays in the role. Congress is not legislated with the authority to rule on the issue of abortion. There should not be abortion legislation that hits our federal courts because it's not a federal issue, it's a states' rights issue.
Let's get down the line on this, just like they did with the Democrats last week on some of these trickier calls, but they do have clear answers. Starting with you, Governor, would the day that Roe v. Wade is repealed be a good day for America?
Absolutely.
Senator?
Be a glorious day of human liberty and freedom.
Governor?
Yes, it was wrongly decided.
Governor?
Most certainly.
Congressman?
Yes.
Yes. Governor? Senator?
Yes.
Repeal.
Mayor?
It'd be okay.
Okay to repeal?
It would be okay to repeal. It would be okay also if a strict constructionist judge viewed it as precedent, and I think a judge has to make that decision.
Would it be okay if they didn't repeal it?
I think the court has to make that decision, and then the country can deal with it. We're a federalist system of government, and states can make their own decisions.
Congressman?
After 40 million dead because we have aborted them in this country, I say that would be the greatest day in this country's history when that is, in fact, overturned.
We're looking for nuance here. Governor Gilmore, you have said in the past that you believe in the first 8 to 12 weeks of pregnancy that a woman should have the right to have an abortion. Do you still stick with that exception?
I do, Chris. My views on this, my beliefs on this are a matter of conviction. And they've always been the same, and they've never changed the entire time that I've been in public life. However, my record as governor of Virginia, I think, has been one that the pro-life community of which I'm a part would be very proud. Passing a 24-hour waiting period, passing informed consent, passing parental notification, signing the partial birth abortion law in Virginia. So I think the record is there. But my views are strongly and fundamentally believed and been held that way.
Governor Thompson, do you have any nuance on this, or you're just happy with the repeal of Roe v. Wade?
I believe it should be left up to the states. That was what was originally implied, and the Constitution was changed when the Supreme Court made the decision. I, like a lot of people up here, have made a record of pro-life for a long time, signing the partial birth abortion, pre-notification for parents, and so on. I think it's imperative that states have the responsibility for making these laws.
John.
Governor Romney, in recent months, you've said you were, quote, always for life, but we've also heard you say you were once, quote, effectively pro-choice. Which is it?
Well, I've always been personally pro-life, but for me it was a great question about whether or not government should intrude in that decision. And when I ran for office, I said I'd protect the law as it was, which is effectively a pro-choice position. About 2 years ago, when we were studying cloning in our state, I said, look, we have gone too far. It's a brave new world mentality that Roe v. Wade has given us, and I changed my mind. I took the same course that Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush and Henry Hyde took, and I said I was wrong. and changed my mind and said I'm pro-life. And I'm proud of that, and I want to apologize to anybody for becoming
Governor,
pro-life.
with respect, some people are going to see those changes of minds as awfully politically convenient.
I told you that I studied at great length this issue. When I ran, for the very first time, I told you that I was personally pro-life, but that I would protect a woman's right to choose as the law existed, and that stayed the same until 2 years ago, as I indicated. And at that time, as a result of the debate we had, the conclusion I reached was that we had gone too far, that cloning and that creating new embryos was wrong, and that we should therefore allow our state to become a pro-life state. I believe states should have the right to make this decision, and that's a position I indicated in an op-ed in the Boston Globe 2 years ago.
And just to recap and a brief summary of the various positions, Thompson, Giuliani, and Ron Paul, all states' rights. The rest of them pro-life, and Mitt Romney's even a little bit defensive for some reason. One has to ask oneself at his age and at his this point in his political career, just how badly does John McCain want to be president? Well, he answered that question in the debates and sort of gave his summary as to what he thought he would be like or he should do or whatever to be president, and what he knew for sure. Now for me, the things that I want my president to know are the Constitution, his limitations as being a president, and shit better to do than to be a dick and always support the military.
I want to be President of the United States to defeat our enemies and to work with our allies. I want to lead this nation. I may not be the youngest candidate in this race, but I'm the most prepared. I'm prepared to take on the greatest challenge of our time, and that's the specter and threat of radical Islamic extremism, which threatens our very values and our very life. I know how the world works. I know the good and evil in it. I've seen it. I know how the military works. I know what the military should do and what it shouldn't do. And I know what it can do. I know how to make Congress work for you and not for their re-election. My friends, we face enormous challenges, whether it be a burgeoning deficit, out of control spending, and need for energy independence, and we need most of all to restore faith in our government and confidence in the leadership. My friends, I don't want to be president of a failed nation. I don't want to be president of a sad nation or one that thinks our best years are behind us. I want to be president of a proud, powerful, great, bountiful nation, and as president, I intend to lead it.
Despite the fact that the majority of them are not taking him seriously, they did give Ron Paul a little bit of time to speak, and he really hits home with these comments here about how our country went from being a great nation, only conflicting with huge superpower like Russia, to being worried about third world governments that can barely house their own people.
Dr. Paul, how do you reconcile this moral leadership kind of role of conservatism with the very libertarian strain of conservatism, the Barry Goldwater conservatism that you represent? How do you put together what he just said with what you believe in a unified national purpose?
Well, you do it by an understanding what the goal of government ought to be. If the goal of government is to be the policeman of the world, you lose liberty. And if the goal is to promote liberty, you can unify all segments. The freedom message brings us together. It doesn't divide us. I believe that when we overdo our military aggressiveness, what it does, it actually weakens our national defense. I mean, we stood up to the Soviets. They had 40,000 nuclear weapons. Now we're fretting day in and day night about third world countries that have no army, navy, or air force, and we're getting ready to go to war. But the principle, the moral principle, is that of defending liberty and minimizing the scope of government. And
I'm sorry, we have to go on. We have to go on.
John McCain decided that he got his head out of his ass and made these funny comments about congressional overspending.
On the issue of why we lost the election in 2006 is because we did lose our way. We began to value principle over power, and spending got out of control. Spending lurched completely out of control. Ronald Reagan used to say we spend money like a drunken sailor. I never knew a sailor drunk or sober with the imagination of the Congress. And by the way, I received an email recently from a guy who said, as a former drunken sailor, I resent being compared to members of Congress.
Then we decide to talk about the controversial to me topic of line item veto. Line item veto essentially is the ability of the president, executive authority, to partially sign part of a bill that was passed through Congress, but not sign the whole thing. For instance, passing portions that are law and then rejecting parts that are budget. Now, the important part of line item veto is that it's not structured to allow for good governance, for one, and for two, the Constitution is very strict about the kind of veto authority the president has. He either has the power to sign a bill into law or to reject it, sending it back to Congress. And I really think that it's unconstitutional and an abuse of executive authority to continue supporting the use of line item veto. Now, the last few presidents have started to do that. In fact, in President Bush, just recently, I mean, he hasn't vetoed more than a couple of bills in his entire presidency. Now, he's of course taken the bills and scratched out which he doesn't want to enforce and what he will. And that's absolutely not what the job of the president is to do. That does not enforce good legislation. All it does is allow pork to pass, the pork that's favored by the president, and it doesn't allow Congress to rewrite bills to be more fit. It doesn't reject the budgets, and it really fucks up. It really fucks up the legislative code to do that. So, in a conscientious effort, I ask my viewers, please do not support any candidates such as John McCain, who support line item veto. And, of course, his comments follow.
Thanks, Chris. This is actually a great follow to that, Senator McCain. Chris Harris from Manhattan, Kansas is very concerned about the budget and about deficits. He wants to know, what specific programs would you cut if you were president?
Line item veto is the best tool. President Reagan sought it, and we need it very badly. There are a whole variety of programs that need to be cut, and I would start in cleaning up defense acquisition. The cost overruns associated with the purchase of our weapon systems is completely out of control. There's a $160 million destroyer combat ship that is now $400 million. We've got to get that under control first. Let's stop the pork barrel spending, then we'll go at programs, each one of them.
Governor Huckabee totally avoids answering a good question about what kind of letter grade he would give our current administration. I would probably say a D-, and the only reason I don't flunk him is because I would appease too many liberals to say F.
Governor Huckabee, a Politico.com reader wants a letter grade. He wants to know A through F. How would you rate the Bush administration's handling of the Iraq War?
I think it's too early to give them the grade. You don't give a student a grade in the middle of the exam. We're still in the middle of the exam. Let's wait and see how it turns out. Then we can give the president a grade.
But a teacher will usually give you a heads up maybe midway through that semester.
My teachers never did. I don't know where you went to school, but in Arkansas, we didn't get a grade until it was over, and usually we didn't want to take it home.
When touching on the issue of abortion, Giuliani has a tough issue. The Republican Party line is that abortion is wrong and evil, and the religious traditionalist conservatives want abortion banned everywhere. Giuliani, being a much more moderate Republican, is for states' rights in the issue of abortion, and in general, he's fine with the pro-choice initiative. However, he doesn't really want to say that in the Reagan Library, so he sort of goes back and forth on the issue, which is something that I don't like personally. But when it comes right down to the issue of abortion, yeah, I do agree that it is a states' rights issue. States have the right to determine whether or not they want to have that be legal or not. However, it's not really in the interest of the Constitution to forthright ban abortion.
Let me ask Mayor Giuliani, do you want to respond to this? Because it seems like across the room here, this strong, unrelenting, with the exception of Governor Gilmore, an unrelenting pro-life position. You seem to have a nuanced position on this. Many people think you're pro-choice. Could you define it in a couple of seconds?
Sure. This is a very, very difficult issue of conscience for many, many people. In my case, I hate abortion. I would encourage someone to not take that option. When I was mayor of New York City, I encouraged adoptions. Adoptions went up 65, 70%. Abortions went down 16%. But ultimately, since it is an issue of conscience, I would respect a woman's right to make a different choice. I support the ban on partial birth abortion. I support the Hyde Amendment. But ultimately, I think when you come down to that choice, You have to respect a woman's right to make that choice differently than my conscience.
There is a brief roundtable on the issue of stem cell research. That issue, of course, very controversial with religious conservatives who believe that we're abusing lives, if you can call them lives, for scientific gain, which of course science is evil. So I will praise John McCain for actually standing up and saying that stem cell research should be is okay. However, he and Giuliani both make it a point to mention that they're interested in financing stem cell research, while most of the conservatives on the panel say no. The one note that I will make is that Ron Paul is pretty consistent about the issue. He doesn't see there being anywhere in the Constitution that says that Congress has the ability or authority to ban stem cell research or to finance it. So unless it has that ability, there's absolutely no reason why there should be a debate on whether or not it should be banned or financed. It shouldn't be banned or financed. It should be left alone by the government because they don't have any of the authority to deal with that issue.
These questions down the line. We have Mrs. Reagan here. The camera will not focus on her, but I will tell you it will now focus on you. Mrs. Reagan wants to expand federal funding of embryonic stem cell research. Will that progress under your administration, Governor?
Certainly will. Altered nuclear transfer, I think, is perhaps the best source.
Embryonic.
Altered nuclear transfer creates embryo-like cells that can be used for stem cell research. In my view, that's the most promising source. I have a deep concern about curing disease. I have a wife that has a serious disease that could be affected by stem cell research and others, but I will not create new embryos through cloning or through embryo farming, because that will be creating life for the purpose of destroying it.
And you won't take any from these fertility clinics to use either?
I'm happy to allow that to be, I shouldn't say happy. It's fine for that to be allowed to be legal. I won't use our government funds for that. Instead, I want our government funds to be used on Dr. Hobart's method, which is altered nuclear transfer.
The same question, embryonic stem cell research with federal funds, sir.
It will not, with all due respect to Mrs. Reagan and her desires here. I've studied this matter a great deal. We are curing and healing people with adult stem cells. It is not necessary to kill a human life for us to heal people, and we're doing it with adult stem cell work, and it's getting done.
I'm going to have to go yes or no. Governor Gilmore, for embryonic stem cell federal funding or not?
We can't create people in order to experiment with people.
Governor Huckabee.
I would concur. I don't think it's right to create a life to end a life. That's not a good health decision.
No, I'd like to show Mrs. Reagan the alternatives, which are adult stem cells.
Governor Thompson.
There's so much research going on, Chris. You cannot answer that question yes or no. There's research currently going on right now at the Weizmann Center in Madison, Wisconsin, that's going to allow for adult stem cells to become pluripotent, which will have the same characteristics of embryonic stem cells, so you do not have to kill an embryo.
Senator, embryonic stem cell federal funding.
I want to thank Mrs. Reagan for the many kindnesses extended to me, and my fellow prisoners of war many years ago when we came home to this wonderful state. I believe that we need to fund this. This is a tough issue for those of us in the pro-life community. I would remind you that these stem cells are either going to be discarded or perpetually frozen. We need to do what we can to relieve human suffering. It's a tough issue. I support federal funding.
That's a yes. Dr. Paul, yes or no on federal funding?
Programs like this are not authorized under the Constitution. The trouble with this, issues like this is, in Washington, we either prohibit it or subsidize it. And the market should deal with it and the state should deal with it.
That's a no.
As long as we're not creating life in order to destroy it, as long as we're not having human cloning, and we limit it to that, and there's plenty of opportunity to then use federal funds in those situations where you have limitations. So I would support it with those limitations.
All right, I'm going to lead in with some comments here before they have a roundtable on the taxes they would like to cut. And I'm going to make some comments various. This might skip around a little bit because I have a few comments to make. Senator Brownback's alternative flat tax. Now, what the alternative flat tax is Senator Brownback's proposition that we have the alternative to be under a different tax skew, that the country can choose to be taxed one of two ways. One is the traditional IRS method with a progressive tax, and number two is just to be taxed 18%, no deductions, no nothing. 18% of your check gone, that's it. And personally, I like the idea of having an alternate system, because the alternate system is nice. Having an alternate system for a while would ease transition. If we were proposing, for instance, to replace the IRS with a flat tax system, it would help ease the transition between the tax systems to have a period where there's an alternative. In fact, I think there should be several alternatives thought of. So it's an interesting idea. However, I'm not as big of a fan of a flat tax. I hate to say that I like the idea of progressive taxation. I really don't. But the fact of the matter is that it's hard for our society to stay in a state of flux with our income classes, and it is hard for people to move up and down the ladder. It is exceptionally easy for the rich, who are few, to lose their money, but it's not very easy for that money to circulate throughout our economy. And I think that's important to keep in mind when we think about taxation systems, and a absolute flat tax would not be very viable in facilitating in that. However, if we cut spending, the taxation issue wouldn't be an issue. But when it comes right down to it, I also do think that I think the opportunity to have an alternative is kind of cool. And it at least interests me. I would like to hear a proposal on that.
Put forward an alternative flat tax and allow people to choose between the current tax code and system, which doesn't work, which ought to be taken behind the barn and killed with a dull axe, and an alternate flat tax, and let them choose.
Gilmore relies on a good point when he reminds us that the taxation policies advocated by our various panel constituents really has no bearing on reality if none of them are actually even attempted or tried. And well, more to the point, a lot of the tax schemes that these presidential hopefuls have will never see the light of day.
You know, Chris, I've been a governor of Virginia. I ran on a tax cut proposal. I ran on eliminating a car tax in Virginia. I received terrific opposition to doing that. I kept my word, kept my promise, and we eliminated that car tax. Now, the question is, who is actually going to do what they say they're going to do? Where you have been is where you're going to go. And I have actually lived up to my word. And the answer is the alternative minimum tax, which is continuing to drive people in the middle class into higher and higher taxation.
A couple different people on the panel talk about the alternative minimum tax. The alternative minimum tax is essentially a tax on the sort of upper middle class area, where people are required to pay a certain percentage, regardless of what else they're taxed. And it's slowly, as inflation happens, the middle class moves slowly into this tax bracket, where they are subject to the alternative minimum tax. However, that is still a very high bracket to set. Now, like I said, I'm not necessarily in favor of progressive taxation, but when it comes right down to it, a lot of these people here, they're paying a minimum. When they're paying a minimum, that is still it's still quite a bit, but it is beating a lot of people who are now in the middle class. But as far as I'm concerned, it's not the biggest tax issue that we have. The biggest tax issue that we have is that we are rapidly overspending, and it's impossible really to expect people to come up with a good tax system when we have so much money that we need to get from people. And once again, we have line item veto mentioning by McCain, who is a fuck.
Give the President of the United States the line item veto on these bills as well as spending bills. The alternate minimum tax is obviously eating Americans alive, and it's got to be repealed. Another one I think is important is a $3,000 tax credit for people to be able to purchase health insurance. So low-income Americans will have access to health care, which is an amazing and difficult problem today, and a simpler, flatter, fair tax so that Americans don't have to spend $140 billion as they just did last April to prepare the tax.
And of course we have Ron Paul's very economically conscious comments about the nature of inflation in our system. Yes, poor people do have to pay more progressively over time. And it's not just that the companies are hiking the prices up on us. The inflation is about 5% any given year, and it's because that's how much more our government overprints money to adjust for the fact that that it wants to spend more. So the lost gains that come from the overproduction of money circulating in our society winds up increasing the prices of everything, and that's why, for instance, minimum wages always go up. That's why prices don't stay the same over the years. Naturally, technology and innovation are a reason that prices change. And the movements of the economy, that too are reasons prices change. But all prices change pretty much universally upwards so long as we have an inflationary economic policy. And of course, that is one of the things that a guy like Ron Paul would address, which is unfortunate then that a lot of the constituents on the panel don't take him quite as seriously. But give his thoughts, give his comments some consideration.
Well, in my first week, I already got rid of the income tax. So my second week, I would get rid of the inflation tax. It's a tax that nobody talks about. We live way beyond our means with a foreign policy we can't afford and an entitlement system that we have encouraged. We print money for it, the value of the money goes down, and poor people pay higher prices. That is a tax. It's a transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to Wall Street. Wall Street's doing quite well, but the inflation tax is eating away at the middle class of this country. We need to get rid of the inflation tax with sound money.
Representative Tom Tancredo also finishes up with some comments about the mandatory spending provisions in our government. A lot of the stuff that we spend is not discretionary. It's part of the legal code that we have to spend a certain amount. For instance, take Social Security. Social Security spending is mandatory spending, whereas other types of spending are discretionary. We could cut all of the money that we spend in the military, but even if we did so, we wouldn't eliminate the massive amount of deficit that we have in our budget. So we do have to adjust many of the institutions that we have in government to properly allocate our spending resources if we want to have low taxes.
For all the reasons mentioned by some of my colleagues, I absolutely support the fair tax. It has to be accompanied, however, with the repeal of the 16th Amendment, or we'd end up with a consumption tax and an income tax. And all this talk about vetoing spending bills and how that's going to solve our problem. Let me tell you, my friends, you can veto all the spending bills you want. You will not touch the deficit until you actually deal with the structural problem in mandatory spending. That's where all the money is. You can veto every one of the bills that come to you as a discretionary funding, including the military if you wanted to. It is, in fact, mandatory spending that has to be dealt with. Or forget the idea.
Anyways, to continue, Mike Huckabee totally dodges a question about political corruption and turns it into a question about immigration.
This question comes from a reader in New York. In light of the scandals plaguing the current administration and its allies involving corruption and cronyism, which mistakes have you learned not to repeat?
Most important thing a president needs to do is to make it clear that we're not going to continue to see jobs shipped overseas, jobs that are lost by American workers, many in their 50s who for 20 and 30 years have worked to make a company rich, and then watch as a CEO takes a $100 million bonus to jettison those American jobs somewhere else, and the worker not only loses his job, but he loses his pension. That's criminal. It's wrong, and if Republicans don't stop it, we don't deserve to win in 2008.
And of course, we'll get a comment quickly about Ron Paul and his views on the internet and mainstream media. I think it is important to say that yes, there are some elements of the mainstream media which are okay, and there are some elements that aren't, and I really don't think that it's black and white all the time. However, yeah, I do trust the internet more as a resource for learning about things. It certainly has more comprehensive information available. And when it comes to topics and viewpoints from the mainstream media, we do have to remember that the mainstream media isn't all there is. And yes, the internet should remain free because it right now is one bastion away from mainstream media as a source of information.
Carrie from Connecticut asks, do you trust the mainstream media?
Some of them. But I trust the internet a lot more. And I trust the freedom of expression, and that's why we should never interfere with the internet. That's why I have never voted to regulate the internet, even when there's the temptation to put bad things on the internet. Regulation of bad and good on the internet should be done differently. But no, there's every reason to believe that we have enough freedom in this country to have freedom of expression, and that's what is important. And whether or not we trust the mainstream or not, I think you pick and choose. There are some friends and some aren't so friendly.
Thank you, Doctor. It's time.
I'm also going to show you snippets from the National ID Card Roundtable from their 30-second replies. I do want to note that the frontrunners, Giuliani, Romney, and McCain, they all seem to pretty much blatantly support the National ID Card, which is something that I frankly am against.
Chris?
We're at the last round. It's going to be 30-second responses. I want to start with Mayor Giuliani, something you've come out for, I believe. I want you to explain it and defend it. A national tamper-proof ID card.
Yeah, I think that's critical to having immigration security. Every single person in this country who comes in from a foreign country should be identified, should be in a database. It should be a tamper-proof card. I probably have the most experience in dealing with security. I had to take a city that had an outlandish amount of crime and reduce it. So the very, very best way to sensibly create security is to have a tamper-proof card, a database, and then kind of back up from that. Well, how do we get there? That would allow for a fence, a technological fence, Border Patrol, having people come forward, and people who are paying taxes or who want to pay taxes, God bless them. Let them pay taxes.
Governor Romney, I think, are you with him on that, a tamper-proof ID card?
Absolutely. I had the occasion, as you know, following the great disaster on 9/11 to help organize the Olympic Winter Games, bring people from all over the world together in Salt Lake City, organize the first national special security event following that tragedy, and brought together law enforcement from all over the country, coordinated them in a way that we could communicate with each other. There's no question as we deal with the issue of immigration, having a national special card that indicates a person's name, date, birth date, biographic information, and a indication of their work status will allow us to know who's here legally, who's not, who can work, and who cannot.
Is someone against this on libertarian grounds, the idea of a national ID card? Senator Brownback.
I don't think this is the way to go, and I don't think we need to go this way. And I've been serving on the Judiciary Committee and working on these immigration issues. What we need to do is secure the border with a fence, and then interior-wise, we need to make sure that that Social Security number means something. We already have a Social Security number.
How's that different than a national ID card if it works?
Because we don't need a new system, and we don't need a new ID card.
Senator McCain, are you for a national tamper-proof ID card?
That's one of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission, and absolutely, if someone wants to work, they have to have a document that's tamper-proof, and any employer who employs someone else with any other document like a bogus Social Security card or birth certificate should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Dr. Paul.
I am absolutely opposed to a national ID card. This is a total contradiction of what a free society is all about. The purpose of government is to protect the secrecy and the privacy of all individuals, not the secrecy of government. We don't need a national ID card.
Mr. Tancredo, do you agree with the need of a national tamper-proof ID card?
I do not think we need a national ID card, much for the reasons that Dr. Paul said. We absolutely need a verifiable Social Security card. They are two separate things. I believe that we can accomplish the former without jeopardizing individual liberties.
But you say legally you have to be who you say you are.
Pardon me?
You have to be the person on that card.
That is absolutely.
And by the way, the national ID card, that's for aliens, not for citizens.
Oh, you don't want a national ID card for everyone?
It's for those that come here outside the country.
Mayor Giuliani, you want it for everyone, right?
No, I'm talking about it for people who come into the United States, foreigners, people who come in as immigrants into the United States.
Okay.
Candidates Tancredo and Brownback both make valid points that we do have identification systems in place, such as a Social Security card number, that are currently not being used as effectively as they could be. However, I do want to note that the purpose of the Social Security card number is not to track each and every one of us with a barcode on our head. It's to provide us information about the Social Security system, and to provide us tracking for our benefits for our Social Security system, especially when we become old enough to redeem those. Not that when I'm old enough there will even be such a system available, or if there is, it'll be a terrible burden on our economy. Point being is that when it comes right down to it, the national ID card system is a way for government to federalize something that has been a state issue for some time now. The topic of a national ID card is something of a guise for other issues. I mean, they tell us that the purpose of the national ID card is to prevent illegal immigration. That's not going to happen. It's not going to prevent terrorism or make more effective our tracking of terrorists. And providing, in fact, it could even make the issue worse, since national ID cards would be easier to forge probably than even state-based ones, which are all different. Essentially, though, when it comes right down to identifying people, we do have to have ways to identify people, or else our civil or legal code becomes nonsense. Our entitlement, and especially when we have a government full of entitlements. However, I don't think that it's government's central purpose to be trying to identify everybody, and that we should only do so in the extent that it benefits the services that our government provides. We should not be doing so in the extent of attempting to track or monitor everybody in the world, especially when such tracking systems are prone to be undermined. And our candidates are asked a roundtable question about whether or not they think Bill Clinton should be back in office. I personally would have just wrapped up with a pussy whip joke about him and Hillary.
But let me ask you about something else that might be a negative in the upcoming campaign. Seriously, would it be good for America to have Bill Clinton back living in the White House?
You have got to be kidding.
No, I'm not. His wife's running. Have you heard?
The only thing I can think of to be as bad as that would be to have the gang of three running the war on terror. Pelosi, Reid, and Hillary Clinton. So I have to be honest with you, I think it would be an awful thing.
Senator Brownback.
For a lot of reasons.
I think it'd be bad because it would mean that Hillary Clinton would be elected, not because of who she is, but because of the policies that she stands for, of raising taxes, of not standing up for life or marriage. I mean, those are what would be bad
Governor
for the country.
Bill Clinton back in the White House.
You know, no, because that would mean that Hillary Clinton would be president of the United States. And where you have been is where you're going to go. And Hillary Clinton tried to socialize medicine in this country. A very bad idea. You need to keep that in the private sector. And yet she said in their own...
We have a Razorback ready to talk here. Razorback from Arkansas. Should the Clintons come back to the White House, especially Big Bill?
No one on this stage probably knows Hillary Clinton better than I do, and I will tell you that it's probably not a good idea to have either of them in the White House.
Bill Clinton back home.
You know, Bill Clinton cut the U.S. Army by almost 50% in this war against terror. He's a wrong guy to have in there.
Heading there. Senator.
No, because it obviously would mean that Senator Clinton is the President of the United States, and we don't want that. Most importantly, it would mean that the appointment of Supreme Court justices and other judges would take a very sharp turn to the left. One of our greatest problems in America today is justices that legislate from the bench, activist judges. I'm proud that we have Justice Alito and Roberts on the United States Supreme Court. I'm very proud to have played a very small role in making that happen.
I am known for sticking to principle and not flip-flopping. I voted to impeach him, so hardly do I want him back in the White House.
Mayor Giuliani.
It would mean that we were back on defense against terrorism, given Senator Clinton's recent positions. And the reality is, in the 1990s, we were on defense in dealing with Islamic fundamentalist terrorism. When you had this debate last week and all the Democrats were up here, I never remember the words Islamic fundamentalist terrorism being spoken by any of them. I heard it a lot tonight.
Mr. Tancredo, last thought?
I know that he is presently measuring the drapes over in the Oval Office, but no, it's a lousy idea.
I want to take a moment to focus on, or to show you Mike Huckabee's closing comments. I think they're very nice about the 10th Amendment, his honoring of the spirit of the 10th Amendment, and decentralized federal government with strong state governments. I believe that would be a good system if we embrace it more openly. However, I don't see him or any of the other candidates willing to do that. Of course, except besides poor old Ron Paul, who's probably just glad. Well, Paul's glad to be there, I guess.
Mr. Huckabee, Governor.
I want to make sure that we went to a place where the states had more power and not centralized in the federal government. That's been a mistake of this administration. I think an honest and sincere one, but a huge mistake. And instead, we need to honor the 10th Amendment. We need to remember that we are a nation of strong states.
I do want to spotlight Giuliani's final sentiment, where he invokes 9/11 to bolster his campaign. I don't think that because he was the mayor of New York during 9/11 automatically defaults to him being a national hero. And I really think that my biggest problem with Giuliani is that he lacks any kind of focus. He is a good, moderate Republican, but he doesn't have he doesn't focus really hard on those Republican ideas. He winds up doing too many dickheaded moves, and that really is the position of a lawyer and somebody who's been in New York as long as he has. It's probably terminally corrupted his mind. But let's go ahead. I'm going to show you that, and then I'm going to wrap up.
I think we should remind ourselves, because I remember it every day, that on September 11, 2001, we thought we were going to be attacked many, many times between then and now. We haven't been. I believe we had a president who made the right decision at the right time on September 20th, 2001 to put us on offense against terrorists. I think history will remember him for that, and I think we as Republicans should remind people of that.
Actually, sooner than wrap up myself, I'll let Ron Paul wrap up for me.
I certainly would continue on my earlier theme that foreign policy needs to be changed. Mr. Republican Robert Taft, we have a statute of him in Washington. He advocated the same foreign policy that I advocate. I would work very hard to protect the privacy of American citizens, being very, very cautious about warrantless searches, and I would guarantee that I would never abuse habeas corpus.
All right, and that was the first tier of the 2008 presidential debates. I hope I gave you an opportunity to see the viewpoints of many of the candidates, and I hope you gave me an opportunity to hear my various bitchings and rantings about them. I appreciate you listening. I want to hear your feedback and your comments, so feel free to leave them all over, anywhere, on my video blogs, websites, etc., and have a great evening.